October 1967, a rural schoolhouse in Bolivia. A captured guerrilla fighter, filthy and cornered, stares down the soldier sent to execute him. He doesn't beg. Instead, he issues a final command. Shoot, coward. You are only going to kill a man. That man was Ernesto Che Guevara, and in death, his last words proved entirely accurate. The Bolivian army killed the man, but they accidentally immortalized the idea. Today, you see his face everywhere, on t-shirts, murals, and massive bronze statues, sanitized into a global mascot for youthful rebellion. But the man behind the myth is buried under decades of propaganda. How exactly did a privileged, asthmatic medical student turn into the 20th century's most uncompromising, violent revolutionary? To answer that, we have to look at where he started. Ernesto Guevara was born in Rosario, Argentina, into a wealthy, upper-middle-class family. Growing up, he was entirely insulated from the grueling financial hardships that typically spark revolutions. He was a walking contradiction, a child crippled by severe asthma who forced himself to become a fiercely competitive athlete, swimmer, and rugby player. And when he wasn't pushing his physical limits, he was confined indoors, devouring his family's massive 3,000-book library, reading everything from Pablo Neruda to Karl Marx. By 1948, he was on a highly traditional, prestigious path. He enrolled in the University of Buenos Aires to study medicine, fully intending to become a doctor. Ernesto wasn't a victim of systemic oppression. He had money, education, and social standing. His eventual radicalization wouldn't be something he inherited from his circumstances. It would be a deliberate, intellectual choice. In 1952, Ernesto left his medical studies for an 8,000-mile motorcycle expedition across Latin America. Traveling, the insulation of his wealthy upbringing shattered. He witnessed indigenous farmers working for pennies, starving families, and a continent fractured by extreme wealth disparity. For a man training to be a doctor, the realization was crushing. Treating a single patient's cough or broken bone meant nothing if the entire society they lived in was diseased by systemic exploitation. By the time he returned, he was no longer interested in writing prescriptions. He decided that the only way to truly heal people was to completely dismantle the capitalist system that kept them in poverty. Looking for sweeping social change, Ernesto traveled to Guatemala in 1953. The country was led by President Jacobo Arbenz, who was implementing moderate institutional reforms to fix deep socioeconomic divides. But those reforms threatened American corporate interests, so the United States stepped in. The CIA backed a violent military coup, forced Arbenz to resign, and installed a puppet government friendly to American capitalism. Ernesto watched the coup unfold firsthand. The event cemented a terrifying psychological conclusion. Peaceful, democratic attempts at leftist reform would always be crushed by imperial powers. Guatemala taught him that the system could not be voted away. It had to be destroyed by force. Ernesto left the country, abandoning his old identity, and fully embracing the militant persona the world would soon know as Che. In Mexico, Che found the perfect outlet for this militant ideology, meeting Fidel and Raúl Castro, who were plotting a guerrilla war against Cuba's US-backed military dictator, Fulgencio Batista. Fidel needed a tactician. Che needed an army. Deep in Cuba's Sierra Maestra Mountains, Che operated with a strange, intense duality. On one hand, he used his medical background to build health clinics, construct bakeries, and set up schools to teach illiterate peasants how to read. On the other hand, he demanded absolute ideological purity. If he merely suspected a fellow fighter of disloyalty, he didn't require a trial or evidence. He executed them on the spot. When the revolution succeeded and Batista's government fell in 1959, that ruthlessness scaled up. Che was immediately appointed commander of the massive, imposing La Cabaña prison. There, he systematically executed hundreds of political opponents and police officers, eventually establishing brutal forced labor camps to punish any remaining dissidents. The young medical student who wanted to cure poverty was gone. In his place was a fanatic, willing to spill as much blood as necessary to forge what he called the communist new man. As an administrator in the new Cuban government, Che applied intense discipline to domestic policy. He drove sweeping educational reforms, pushing Cuba's national literacy rate from 60% to an astounding 96% in less than a year. but he was completely unsuited for the delicate game of international diplomacy. During the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, he was furious when the Soviet Union agreed to remove their nuclear weapons from Cuba. Che openly stated he would have fired the missiles at the United States, fully willing to embrace an apocalyptic nuclear war for the sake of the revolution. He took this aggressive posture to the global stage. Standing before the United Nations General Assembly, he delivered blistering speeches, tearing into American imperialism and urging marginalized nations to take up arms. Operating the economy of a single island wasn't enough. Che didn't want to govern a country, he wanted to eradicate global capitalism entirely. So at the height of his political power, he gave it all up. He resigned from his government posts, left his family, and vanished from Cuba, determined to ignite fresh guerrilla wars across the globe. But his tactics didn't translate. He traveled to the Congo to join a chaotic civil war, only to find disorganized forces that couldn't execute his strategies. Fleeing Africa, he tried again, leading a desperate, secretive insurgency in the dense jungles of Bolivia. This time, his enemies were waiting. A massive force of Bolivian troops, heavily backed by the CIA, tracked his group down. On October 8, 1967, his guerrilla forces were overwhelmed, and Che was finally captured and executed. Che Guevara defies simple categorization. He cured the sick and educated the poor, while simultaneously executing his critics without a second thought. He was a man consumed entirely by an ideology of perpetual conflict, a revolutionary who sacrificed his own life to ensure he would forever remain an